The movie opens in darkness, where a man wakes up and is horrified to find himself in a pit surrounded by a large number of dead bodies. The man is terrified and can't remember who he is or how he ended up in such a bizarre place. He then notices a woman watching him and pleads for help, but she vanishes. Moments later, the woman suddenly throws a rope at him, and before leaving, the man finds a gun, which he keeps for himself. After he successfully escapes the pit, he searches for the woman from earlier, but she's nowhere to be seen. He then makes his way through the woods and soon discovers a house with lights blazing in the midst of darkness. The man cautiously prepares his gun and enters the house, where he sees several people arguing. He quickly points his gun at them and demands answers about who he is and how he ended up here. Another man named Lucas also raises a gun at him and accuses him of killing all those people in the pit. The protagonist then notices the Asian woman who helped him earlier is among them, so he frantically asks if she knows him, but she remains silent. Soon it becomes clear that all of them woke up in this place with no memory of who they are, and they don't even know each other. It turns out they found some ID cards and learned their names, which are Michael, Sharon, Nathan, and Lucas. However, they can't find the ID of the man who woke up in the pit, so they decide to call him John Doe. Then there's the Asian woman who acts like she knows all these people, but unfortunately she doesn't understand English and is mute. The group then realizes that they also have car keys, but there are no vehicles around. Meanwhile, the mute woman tries to communicate by writing something down, but none of them can understand her writing. Next, the group begins exploring around the house. While the mute woman approaches Lucas and tries to communicate, she shows him her arm, which is covered in strange marks, and it turns out that he has the same ones. This leaves him confused, but just then, John summons the mute woman because he saw something on the refrigerator. There's a calendar stuck there with the 18th marked, which is the day after tomorrow. How do they know what day it is? He demands to know what's going to happen on that date, but she can't make him understand, leaving him boiling with frustration. Later, the group finds a room that is filled with a lot of weapons, which scares everyone. Michael then takes a gun, and he seems to be very skilled with it, which implies that he must have been either a police officer or a military officer or a gamer. The group now decides to rest for the day, but they soon notice the mute woman running into the woods alone. So Sharon, Lucas, and John immediately go after her, and they notice the stars look very bright, which implies that they are far away from the city. During this, John begins to have flashbacks of himself dragging the body of a woman with a seahorse tattoo. The group then notices a strong smell and is horrified when they see several dead bodies tied to the trees. Back in the house, Nathan and Michael check the books from the shelves, and Nathan is stunned when he realizes that he is fluent in Latin, French, and even Italian. He also knows that all these books are about medicine and human and animal anatomy, so Michael thinks that Nathan must be the owner of this house. Meanwhile, in the woods, the group soon arrives at a shed where they notice the mute woman feeding an old woman who is tied up and looks completely disheveled and sick. She immediately recognizes John and screams that he used her before trying to attack him. However, John knocks her unconscious, and Lucas notices that there is a camera in the shed, which means someone is watching them. Sharon suggests they should help the woman, but John disagrees, thinking she was tied up for a reason and seems dangerous. The next morning, the group decides that the best thing to do is look for the cars so they can get the hell out of this place. The others proceed to leave while ordering Michael and the mute woman to stay at the house. Michael becomes extremely furious that they left him out and believes that he can be valuable, but they refuse to listen to him. Next, Nathan, Lucas, Sharon, and John head into the woods, where they notice several bodies tied up in the trees again. Soon, a bored Nathan begins throwing rocks randomly, and they soon hear a metallic noise in the bushes. The group grows intrigued, and when they check, they discover that cars are hidden there, which fills them with hope. Back in the cabin, Michael informs the mute woman that he feels a strong connection with her, and perhaps they were a couple. She also looks at him with affection, but soon they're alerted by a scream in the distance. Michael thus asks the woman to lock herself inside, and then rushes to check alone. He soon arrives at a field where he notices a sickly, disheveled man trapped in a fence and screaming for help. Michael thus gets closer to help him, but the man suddenly begins laughing and attacks Michael, piercing his neck with the wires. Meanwhile, in the woods, the group inspects the cars and finds a group picture there in which all of them are present except John. This makes Lucas suspicious of him, and he argues that John isn't part of their group, but John says that he maybe could have taken the picture. The group then tries to start the car, but realizes the fuel is very low, which won't be enough for them to make it to the city. While they wonder what to do, all of a sudden the mute woman arrives and frantically approaches them. They follow her and find Michael, who is bleeding from his neck and on the verge of death. The panicked group desperately tries to help him, but the poor man cannot make it and eventually passes away. This leaves everyone distraught, especially the mute woman, which implies that maybe they were indeed romantic partners. The deranged man in the fence suddenly begins screaming, so a frustrated John shoots him to death. This triggers more memories in his mind, in which he recalls loading weapons and eliminating zombie-like people. Afterwards, John and Sharon get in a car and decide to drive around and look for some help. They soon arrive at an abandoned building where they notice a kid running away. They try to talk to the kid, but he locks himself in some kind of a warehouse and refuses to respond. John begins asking him for help, during which the boy calls him by his real name, Jonah, and tells him to leave, saying they are coming tomorrow. A shocked Jonah wonders how the boy knows his name and demands more answers, but the boy refuses to speak further. This makes Jonah very angry, so he tries to break the lock with a gun and starts shooting at the door, but Sharon eventually stops him and asks him not to hurt the boy, who is just a kid. She then touches Jonah's face, and both feel a strong, familiar connection towards each other. Meanwhile, at the house, Lucas begins to feel strange and also recalls several memories in his head. The mute woman tries to calm him down, but he starts experiencing a strong headache. He then tells the mute woman that he recognizes her, but suddenly begins to grab her arm aggressively until Nathan stops him. Lucas eventually calms down, after which Nathan thinks he is infected with some kind of disease. He tells the mute woman that the group told him about the deranged woman in the shed and asks her to show him the location. She obliges and takes him to the shed, and Nathan instantly recognizes that he has been there before, but they find the place empty while the deranged woman has already left. As he begins to walk, the mute woman tries to stop him, but he assures her that he knows where these roads lead. He thus decides to explore further while the mute woman returns home. Nathan then comes across a pair of glasses on the floor, and when he puts them on, he begins to recall a flood of memories of him arguing with someone. Elsewhere, the mute woman returns home, where Lucas says he knows who she is and begins angrily staring at her. This scares her, so she runs to the attic and locks herself in. Lucas assures her that he doesn't want to hurt her and just wants to talk, but she refuses to open the door. Frustrated, Lucas begins looking for another entrance and soon finds a door outside that leads
to the cellar. He thus decides to go inside and soon finds some kind of lab which has computers, instruments, and even brains floating in tanks. There are also several CCTV cameras monitoring different cells to observe the deranged people, but the cells now seem empty and they must have escaped. In another scene, Nathan comes across a cell where he finds the same deranged woman from the shed holding her dead daughter in her arms. Nathan immediately recognizes the woman and calls her Helen while apologizing for what happened to her daughter. However, the deranged woman suddenly attacks him, so Nathan hurriedly locks her up in a cell. Returning to Lucas, he finds a camera, and upon reviewing past footage, he notices a video in which Jonah is injecting patients for some kind of experiment. However, Jonah also mentions that the vaccine has a side effect, which is temporary memory loss. Lucas soon notices Jonah performing experiments on him and even the mute woman, which boils him with anger. Meanwhile, Jonah and Sharon are returning to the house when a tree suddenly falls in front of the car. Jonah stops just in time, and he soon notices a group of lumberjacks cutting trees and tries to approach them. Sharon is scared and asks him to return to the car, but Jonah ignores her and tries to talk with the men. But unfortunately, they turn out to be infected people who waste no time in chasing them with axes. Horrified, they quickly get to the car to escape, but it doesn't even start, leaving them panicked. So Jonah gets out and tries to push the car with all his strength when the aggressive men approach him. However, before they can hurt him, they suddenly stop for some reason. Jonah and Sharon then notice dead bodies hanging upside down in the trees nearby. They soon realize that these bodies are placed like scarecrows, and it seems the infected are scared of them, possibly due to the smell. Sometime later, they return home, where an angry Lucas immediately confronts Jonah about his bizarre experiment. Jonah claims he doesn't remember anything, while Sharon watches the video and is heartbroken. She checks her arms and realizes she has needle marks as well, while a frustrated Lucas ends up knocking out Jonah. He then drags the men to the pit with the dead bodies, and even though Jonah doesn't want to go there, he has no choice. Upon being thrown into the pit, he notices a dead woman with a seahorse tattoo, which triggers his memories. Later, Lucas returns to the house, and he frantically tells Sharon that they need to leave quickly. She asks about Nathan, but Lucas doesn't even recall who Nathan is. He begins to act very bizarrely and tells the two women that he will protect them both. When he starts to get aggressive, the mute woman runs away from there, but Lucas eventually manages to catch her. He pins her to the ground and tries to forcibly kiss her, so Sharon shows up and shoots his ass, but Lucas dodges the attack and runs frantically into the forest. After this, the mute woman rushes to the pit and throws the rope again, managing to rescue
Jonah. The man then realizes that tomorrow something big is about to happen, so he decides to visit the boy again to look for answers. However, when he arrives there, he finds the door open and notices the boy is nowhere to be seen. Next, Jonah proceeds to drive away when he comes across the boy and his family, who are preparing to leave somewhere and grabbing things from a rundown car. He stops them and asks what's happening, so the boy's grandma asks him to move away. She says Jonah has hurt her whole family with his needles and he should leave. Jonah asks what he had done to them, but the woman just gets in her car and begins to drive. Later, Jonah checks the abandoned car and finds many vials of vaccine there, which triggers another flood of memories. He recalls that he had given them to a man and urged him to deliver them to the army. A confused Jonah checks the car further and soon finds his and Sharon's picture, which proves that they were a couple. Then, all of a sudden, a vehicle collides with his car, and it turns out to be Lucas, who seems to be losing his mind. Jonah then says he recalls that he was a doctor, but he wasn't hurting anyone. He was just trying to help infected people who were plagued by a deadly virus. Jonah then realizes that the effect of the dose has already worn off on Lucas, so if he is injected, he could return to normal again. He thus tries to help the man, but Lucas doesn't listen and instead proceeds to attack Jonah. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Jonah grabs a stone and hits Lucas on the head. He then immediately tries to save his friend, but it's too late as Lucas is now heavily bleeding. During his last moments, Lucas finally recalls that he and Jonah were friends, remembering how he had thanked the doctor for saving him. However, on one occasion, an infected woman with a seahorse tattoo attacked Lucas, so Jonah ended up killing her. He then scolded Nathan as it was his responsibility to close the cells, which sparked a huge argument between them. After this, Jonah began to drag the woman's body, but soon heard from his group that the other infected were also loose. After the group was attacked, Jonah told them to lock themselves in the house and inject themselves so they would heal. At that moment, an infected person bit Jonah, so he ended up falling into the pit. Jonah thus had to inject himself to prevent himself from being infected since he was bitten. He knew that upon waking up, he would not remember anything, but it was the only option. In the present, the group begins to recall everything, so Nathan returns home and quickly hugs Sharon, who also regains her memories. But soon, the house becomes surrounded by infected, who aggressively try to attack them and are no longer scared by the dead bodies. The two struggle to defend themselves as best they can, but they soon run out of ammunition, so Sharon
decides to leave a note for Jonah in case they don't make it. Elsewhere, Jonah is also out of fuel, so he begins sprinting home only to be confronted by several infected. But then, all of a sudden, a helicopter arrives out of nowhere and opens fire, eliminating the infected. It turns out to be the morning of the 18th, and Nathan finally recalls that it was the day the rescue team was supposed to arrive to save them. He happily leaves the house, waving his hands and shouts that they are here and still alive. However, the soldiers are ordered to exterminate everyone, and they brutally shoot Nathan to death, while Jonah arrives just in time to witness this. Sharon and the mute woman also see this and are horrified, so they rush to hide. Next, Jonah and Sharon reunite, and the man feels distraught as it turns out that Nathan was his brother. The two then proceed to flee, while the mute woman also hides herself very well, and the soldiers can't find her. But, unfortunately, Sharon is soon attacked by an infected woman and brutally stabbed. Jonah now begins to panic, so to prevent the soldiers from shooting them, the two have no choice but to jump into the pit with the dead bodies. To trick the soldiers into believing that they're dead, Jonah injects Sharon with the vaccine again before injecting himself as well. This means that they will have no memories when they wake up and go through it all over again. Sharon thus gives a note to Jonah and asks that next time he must remember everything and do things right. The two then express their love for each other before they pass out. Shortly after, the military arrives and begins throwing bodies into the pit, including the boy who had warned Jonah yesterday. A while later, Jonah wakes up with no memory of anything, while Sharon seems to have died from her injuries. Jonah then gets up and doesn't notice the note that has fallen to the ground. The puzzled man begins shouting for help, so the mute woman arrives and throws the rope again to help him out. At this point, we learn the contents of the note, in which Sharon has revealed information about the plague, and it turns out that the only person immune to the disease is the mute woman. Sharon thus urges Jonah to protect the mute woman at all costs, as she is the last hope for humanity. Unfortunately, Jonah knows none of this, and he has to piece the whole thing together all over again. The movie ends with Jonah and the mute woman approaching the edge of the pit and watching an enormous open grave overflowing with thousands of corpses.